This story is titled, "My Sister Let Our Dying Mom Think I Never Visited Her in Hospital." 3 years later, she shows up at my door needing a kidney. Life has a funny way of bringing past betrayals back to haunt you. 3 years ago, my sister Emily, 32F, destroyed my relationship with our dying mother through a web of lies. Now she's standing at my doorstep, desperation in her eyes, asking for my kidney. The irony would be almost poetic if it weren't so infuriating. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly what happened and why her appearance has thrown my carefully rebuilt life into complete chaos. I'm Jessica, 35F, and before everything fell apart, I had what most would consider a normal relationship with my family. My younger sister Emily and I weren't exactly best friends, but we got along well enough. Our father Mark, 60M, had passed away when we were teenagers, leaving our mother Linda, 58F, to raise us alone. Mom did her best, working double shifts as a nurse to keep us fed and educated. She was always closer to Emily, though. My sister had a way of demanding attention that I never quite mastered. My life was stable. I had a good job as a physical therapist, lived in a cozy apartment in Boston, and maintained regular contact with my family back in Connecticut. Every other weekend, I'd make the 3-hour drive to visit Mom and Emily. Things weren't perfect, but they were predictable. That all changed when Mom was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2021. The diagnosis hit our family like a thunderbolt. Mom had always been the strong one, the foundation that held us together after Dad died. Now she was the one who needed support, and I was determined to be there for her. I immediately requested a more flexible schedule at work, planning to split my time between Boston and Connecticut during her treatment. What I didn't know then was that Emily had other plans. Looking back, I should have noticed the small signs. The way Emily would tense up when I mentioned visiting Mom in the hospital. How she'd always say Mom was sleeping or too tired for visitors whenever I called. The suspicious looks from the hospital staff when I'd introduce myself as Linda's daughter. But I was too focused on Mom's deteriorating condition to see the manipulation happening right under my nose. You know that feeling when you realize something is terribly wrong, but by then it's already too late? That's what hit me the day I overheard Mom crying to her sister, my Aunt Rachel, 56F, about how much it hurt that I hadn't visited her once during her entire hospital stay. My heart stopped. I had been there almost every weekend for 3 months. I had sat by her bed, held her hand, brought her favorite magazines, and even snuck in her beloved peppermint tea against hospital regulations. But somehow, Mom had no memory of any of this. How was that possible? And why did Emily's name keep coming up in their conversation, always paired with phrases like, "At least she's here," and "I don't know what I'd do without her"? That day marked the beginning of the end, or so I thought. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And Emily showing up at my door 3 years later, clutching medical papers and wearing the same manipulative expression I'd seen so many times before, was just the start of an even more twisted chapter in our family story. The truth about Emily's deception came out in pieces, like a cruel puzzle slowly assembling itself. After overhearing Mom's conversation with Aunt Rachel, I confronted the hospital staff. That's when I met Nina, 45F, a kind-hearted nurse who had been caring for Mom during the night shift. The look of confusion on her face when I explained the situation told me everything I needed to know. According to Nina, Emily had instructed the staff to mark my visits as hers in the visitor log. She convinced them that seeing my name would upset Mom due to some family drama she'd fabricated. But that wasn't even the worst part. Emily had been systematically erasing every trace of my presence, removing the cards I left, taking away the gifts I brought, even deleting photos from Mom's phone that showed I'd been there. All while telling Mom elaborate stories about why I was too busy with my new life in Boston to visit. The betrayal cut deep, but the timing was what made it truly devastating. Mom's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and her lucid moments were becoming rare. By the time I discovered what Emily had done, Mom was already slipping away, her mind clouded by both medication and Emily's lies. I tried to explain, to show her proof of my visits, but she just looked at me with confused, hurt eyes. The last coherent conversation I had with her was her telling me she forgave me for abandoning her, that she understood I had my own life now. The irony of those words still makes my chest ache. Mom passed away 2 weeks later. I was there, but she didn't recognize me in her final moments. Instead, she kept asking for Emily, thanking her for being the only one who stayed. Each word was like a knife twisting in my heart. Emily stood there, playing the role of the devoted daughter perfectly, while I watched the mother I loved die believing I had abandoned her. The funeral was a blur of well-meaning relatives offering condolences, many of them giving me cold looks or avoiding me entirely. Emily had apparently been quite thorough in spreading her version of events. Even Aunt Rachel, who had always been like a second mother to me, could barely meet my eyes. I left immediately after the service, cutting off all contact with Emily and what remained of our family. Some betrayals are simply unforgivable. I spent the next 3 years rebuilding my life. I moved to a different part of Boston, threw myself into my work, and eventually started my own physical therapy practice. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family history, dated a few times, though nothing serious stuck, and adopted a golden retriever named Max who became my closest companion. I was doing okay, not great, but okay. The kind of okay where you learn to live with the pain, like a badly healed bone that aches when it rains. Then came the knock on my door last Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Max's unusual barking should have been my first warning that something was wrong. When I opened the door, there stood Emily, looking both exactly the same and completely different. Her designer clothes couldn't hide how thin she'd become, and there was a yellowish tinge to her skin that set off alarm bells in my medical training. But what really caught my attention was the thick manila envelope clutched in her trembling hands. "I need your help," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm dying." And just like that, the past I'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back, bringing with it a choice I never thought I'd have to make. A choice that would force me to confront not just what Emily had done, but who I wanted to be in the face of her desperation. I wish I could say I slammed the door in her face. That would have been the reaction most people would expect, maybe even understand. Instead, I found myself stepping aside to let her in, watching as she sank into my couch like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Max, usually wary of strangers, lay down at her feet as if he could sense her desperation. The whole scene felt surreal, like one of those nightmares where you can't quite wake up. Emily's story spilled out in a rush of medical terminology and barely suppressed tears. Polycystic kidney disease, genetic, aggressive, and in her case, rapidly progressing toward complete kidney failure. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our mother had spent her life caring for others as a nurse, and now both her daughters were caught in a medical drama of their own. But unlike Mom's cancer, Emily's condition had a potential solution: me. As a physical therapist, I understood enough about organ donation to know what she was asking for. I also knew that being a match wasn't guaranteed, even between siblings. Emily had already tested our few remaining relatives, Aunt Rachel and 2 cousins, but none were compatible. She'd been on the transplant list for 8 months, but her condition was deteriorating faster than expected. According to her doctors, without a living donor, her prognosis was grim. I sat there, listening to her sob about her 2 young children at home, a detail that hit me like a physical blow. I had a niece and nephew I'd never met. Sophia, 6F, and Lucas, for M, she told me, showing me pictures on her phone. They looked so much like Emily and me when we were little that it made my chest hurt. She'd gotten married right after Mom's funeral to a man named Brian, 34M, who was currently working 3 jobs to cover her medical bills. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this could all be another manipulation. Emily had proven herself capable of elaborate lies before. But there was something different about her now, a rawness, a desperation that felt genuine. Or maybe that's just what I wanted to believe. When you've been betrayed so deeply by someone you trusted, every interaction becomes a minefield of doubt. I found myself thinking about Mom, about her final days believing I had abandoned her. The memory still had the power to bring me to my knees. Was this the universe's twisted way of offering redemption? Or was it another trap, another chance for Emily to destroy what little peace I'd managed to find? Emily must have sensed my internal struggle. She pulled out medical records, test results, and doctor's notes from her manila envelope, spreading them across my coffee table like evidence at a trial. Each page documented her declining health in stark, clinical terms. Her hands shook as she showed me the latest lab results, pointing out the numbers that even I could see were dangerously abnormal. Then she said something that stopped my racing thoughts cold. "I know I don't deserve your help. What I did to you and Mom, it was unforgivable. I've spent the last 3 years hating myself for it. But I'm not asking for me anymore. I'm asking for Sophia and Lucas. They don't deserve to grow up without a mother, like we did without Dad." The manipulation was so perfect, so precise, it took my breath away. She'd managed to link her current situation to our shared childhood trauma, to our children's futures, to our past loss, all in one neat package. And the worst part? Even knowing it was manipulation didn't make it any less effective. I found myself standing up abruptly, needing physical distance from the emotional tsunami she'd unleashed. Max followed me to the kitchen, his tail low, sensing my distress. As I gripped the counter, trying to steady myself, my eyes fell on the small framed photo I kept hidden behind my coffee maker. The last picture taken of Mom, where she was truly herself, before the cancer twisted everything. She was smiling, her arms around both of us at my graduation. We looked so happy, so normal. How had we gone from that to this? That's when Emily dropped the final bombshell. She hadn't told anyone in the family she was coming to see me. Not even Aunt Rachel knew she was here. For the first time in our conversation, I saw a glimpse of genuine shame cross her face. She admitted that the family still believed her version of events from 3 years ago, and she hadn't had the courage to tell them the truth. If I agreed to help her, she would have to confess everything. I told Emily I needed time to think, and she left me with her medical records and contact information. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with memories and possibilities. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Emily or even her kids. It was about who I wanted to be, about breaking the cycle of pain our family seemed trapped in. The next morning, I called in sick to work and did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I reached out to Aunt Rachel. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, half expecting her to hang up. Instead, she answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the weight of all our unspoken words. What I learned from that conversation changed everything. Apparently, Emily's life wasn't as perfect as she'd tried to present it. Her husband Brian had reached out to Aunt Rachel several times over the past year, worried about Emily's increasingly erratic behavior. She'd been struggling with severe depression, racked with guilt over what she'd done to me and Mom. She'd even started seeing a therapist, though she kept that secret from most of the family. But here's what really got to me. According to Aunt Rachel, Emily had tried to tell the truth about my hospital visits at Mom's funeral. She'd stood up during the reception, glass in hand, ready to confess everything. But at the last moment, she'd looked around at all the faces, people who had supported her, believed her lies, built their relationships with her on this false foundation, and she'd crumbled. Instead of confessing, she'd just burst into tears and rushed out. Everyone assumed she was just overcome with grief about Mom. The next bombshell came when Aunt Rachel mentioned that she'd found something in Mom's old belongings while cleaning out her house. It was a small notebook, hidden in the bottom drawer of her bedside table. Inside were confused, medication-addled entries from her final months, but one page was surprisingly clear. Mom had written about seeing me in her room late one night, holding her hand and singing the lullaby she used to sing to us as kids. She'd written that it must have been a dream because Emily had told her I was in Boston, but it felt so real she wanted to believe it was true. That entry was dated just 3 days before she passed away. All this time, I'd thought Mom died believing I'd abandoned her, but some part of her had known I was there. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I found myself sitting on my kitchen floor, sobbing, with Max pressing his warm body against me in comfort. But then came the part of Aunt Rachel's story that truly shook me. She revealed that Emily had been diagnosed with kidney disease over a year ago, but had refused to reach out to me, even when her doctors first suggested looking for family donors. It was Brian who had finally convinced her to try, after her latest test results showed critical deterioration. Emily had spent weeks drafting and redrafting a letter to me, trying to find the right words, before finally deciding to show up in person. As I hung up with Aunt Rachel, I noticed 3 missed calls from an unknown number. When I checked my voicemail, I heard Brian's voice for the first time. His message was brief but devastating. Emily had been admitted to the hospital that morning after collapsing at home. Her condition was deteriorating faster than expected, and the doctors were talking about emergency dialysis. The universe, it seemed, wasn't going to give me the luxury of time to make this decision. As I grabbed my keys and jacket, heading for my car with Max trotting anxiously behind me, I couldn't help but wonder, how many times can a family break and rebuild itself before the pieces no longer fit together? And more importantly, was I ready to be the one to try putting them back together this time? The hospital waiting room felt eerily familiar, though this time I was here for Emily instead of Mom. The same antiseptic smell, the same harsh fluorescent lights, the same nervous energy hanging in the air. As I approached the information desk, a small voice called out, "Daddy, who's that lady?" I turned to see a little girl with Emily's eyes, clutching the hand of a man who could only be Brian. The next few hours were a blur of introductions, medical consultations, and painful conversations. Meeting my niece Sophia and nephew Lucas hit me harder than I expected. They were so innocent, so unaware of the complicated history between their mother and me. Lucas was shy, hiding behind his father's legs, but Sophia immediately showed me her favorite stuffed unicorn and asked if I liked sparkles too. Brian turned out to be nothing like I'd imagined. There was a quiet strength about him, tempered by obvious exhaustion. He apologized for Emily's past actions, explaining that she'd finally told him everything last year when her health started declining. He'd been the one urging her to make amends, even before the kidney disease progressed. The guilt, he said, had been eating her alive. Emily was conscious but weak when I finally saw her. The hospital room was different from Mom's, but the beeping machines and 4 lines created the same oppressive atmosphere. She looked small in the hospital bed, her skin now definitely jaundiced. When she saw me, tears immediately started rolling down her cheeks. For a moment, we were both transported back to Mom's room, but now our roles were reversed. The doctors explained that Emily's condition had deteriorated significantly. Her kidneys were failing faster than they'd anticipated, and without a transplant soon, her prognosis was grim. They needed to know if I was willing to be tested as a potential donor. The decision that had seemed impossible just days ago now felt strangely clear. I agreed to the testing, but I had conditions. I needed Emily to do something first. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and recorded a video confession, detailing everything she'd done during Mom's illness. She sent it to Aunt Rachel and our extended family, finally revealing the truth she'd hidden for so long. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages started pouring in: shock, anger, disappointment, and confusion from family members who'd believed Emily's lies. Aunt Rachel called, crying, saying she'd always had doubts but hadn't wanted to believe someone could do something so cruel. The family story we'd all been living was unraveling, and a new, messier truth was taking its place. As I sat by Emily's bed, watching her face crumple under the weight of everyone's reactions, I realized something important. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel at her confession never came. Instead, I felt an odd sense of peace. Not because I'd forgiven her, I wasn't sure I ever could completely, but because the truth was finally out, and that was worth more than any revenge. The preliminary test showed I was a potential match, but there were more detailed tests needed to confirm compatibility. As we waited for results, I found myself spending more time with my niece and nephew. Sophia showed me her school art projects on her tablet, while Lucas gradually warmed up to me, especially when I let him play with Max during hospital visits. They became my anchor in the storm of medical procedures and family drama that followed. One evening, as I was leaving the hospital, Sophia ran after me in the hallway. She thrust a drawing into my hands, a crayon masterpiece featuring 4 stick figures and a dog, all holding hands. "That's you, and Mommy, and me, and Lucas, and Max," she explained proudly. "Daddy says you're helping make Mommy better. Are you a superhero?" I looked down at her hopeful face, so much like Emily's when we were young, and felt the last pieces of my resolve click into place. This wasn't about Emily anymore, or even about Mom. It was about breaking the cycle of loss and pain that had defined our family for too long. Sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that matter most. The transplant surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early spring. The night before, I sat alone in my apartment, reading through Mom's notebook one last time. Aunt Rachel had given it to me, saying it belonged with me now. The pages still smelled faintly of Mom's perfume, and her handwriting, sometimes clear, sometimes shaky from medication, told the story of her final months from a perspective I'd never known. In one of her last entries, she'd written about a dream where Emily and I were children again, playing in our backyard. She described how happy we looked, how she wished we could find the closeness again. Even in her confused state, some part of her had sensed the rift between her daughters, though she never knew the full extent of it. Reading those words, I finally understood that helping Emily wasn't just about saving her life. It was about honoring Mom's last wish for us. The surgery itself went smoothly. When I woke up in recovery, the first thing I saw was Sophia's drawing taped to the wall beside my bed. Someone, probably Brian, had framed it. Through my post-anesthesia haze, those crayon stick figures seemed to dance, a family reimagined through a child's innocent eyes. Recovery was harder than I expected, both physically and emotionally. Emily and I were placed in rooms next to each other, an arrangement that felt like the universe's idea of a joke. During those long days of healing, we had conversations we should have had years ago. Sometimes they were angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes even hopeful. We talked about Mom, about our childhood, about the years we'd lost. Emily admitted that her lies had started small, just little manipulations to get more attention, but had spiraled out of control until she couldn't find her way back to the truth. The hardest conversation came when she asked why I'd agreed to the transplant. I told her about Mom's notebook, about Sophia's drawing, about the weight of choices that shape not just our lives but the lives of the next generation. I made it clear that while I had given her my kidney, earning back my trust would take more than surgery and apologies. 3 months have passed since the transplant. Emily's body accepted the kidney, and she's growing stronger each day. Our relationship is complicated. We're not the close sisters we were as children, and maybe we never will be again. But we're learning to be something new, something built on hard truths rather than comfortable lies. Aunt Rachel has become our bridge, helping us navigate family gatherings and the still raw emotions of our extended family. Some relatives have chosen sides, others are trying to mediate, but most are just relieved that the truth is finally out. The family story has been rewritten, but this time, everyone's version matches. Last weekend, I attended Lucas's 5th birthday party. It was awkward at times, watching Emily try to include me in family traditions I knew nothing about. But then Sophia grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the cake, announcing proudly to everyone that her superhero aunt had saved her mommy. In that moment, I caught Emily's eye across the room. The look we shared wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was something close to understanding. Max now has regular playdates with the kids, and I'm slowly getting to know my niece and nephew beyond their roles as catalysts in this family drama. They're amazing little people, full of stories and questions and unconditional love that children seem to master so naturally. Yesterday, I visited Mom's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought her favorite peppermint tea and sat there for a while, telling her everything that had happened. A light spring rain started falling, and I remembered how she used to say that rain was just the sky's way of washing away old hurts to make room for new beginnings. I don't know if Emily and I will ever fully heal the wounds of the past. Some betrayals leave scars that change us forever. But as I left the cemetery, I realized that maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real victory isn't in erasing what happened, but in choosing to write a different story for the future, one where truth, however painful, lights the way forward. The kidney I gave Emily wasn't just an organ. It was a chance to rewrite our family's legacy. Not with lies this time, but with a complicated, messy truth that carries its own kind of grace. Mom's last dream of her daughters finding their way back to each other is slowly, imperfectly, becoming reality.